It's that time of year where we have matric exams in full swing. We've got more than 780,000 registered candidates across the country who have already begun with their examinations, which began yesterday. Today, of course, we have one of the biggest papers that will be written, and that is the English paper. And right now, in fact, I am joined by a clinical psychologist who's just going to help not only matric pupils throughout this period, but university students, as well as other South Africans who are embarking on their final examinations. I am joined by clinical psychologist Bradley Daniels. Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, let's just start off with this period. We find ourselves this year, very, very tense moment. Emotions are high. People are getting down to, getting those final examinations. What kind of preparation should have they been doing throughout this year?
Well, Slee, thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to really kind of help South Africans out there to change the mindset around exams. So one of the things we need to change around exams is that they are assessment moments. And that takes the anxiety out of the experience. So obviously the matric exams are the big ones that are happening, but as you've just said earlier, that there are many different people that are having assessments at this time of the year because we're ending a year. So usually what we come across is people have a lot of stress, firstly because there's usually quite some sort of load of work that they need to get through under a particular point in time. People also sometimes struggle with anxiety around exams, worrying about their performance in the exam or the assessment, as I prefer to say. So in that assessment, people normally have performance anxiety. Will I do well enough? Am I going to make it? Am I going to get the sort of A? Am I going to cum laude? So it's all those tensions that start to build up around sort of the anxieties around exams. So these are the kinds of things that we need to work with at this time of the year.
Now, of course, you were speaking now on really focusing on these exams as being assessments and that it's not the end of the road if you don't necessarily pass.
Sure, because the assessment is around saying, are you ready to move on to the next level of whatever you're doing? Do you have the right level of competence to be able to move on to the next level? So rather than, I think in the old days, we always thought of exams as a sort of finite and something that sort of ends. So it's kind of like this big loophole you have to jump through and then it's done. And now the encouragement is for people to start looking at it as a lifespan journey. So there's different assessments we'll have at different times in our lives to get us through. So it's around saying, do I have all the skills, the competence, and also the know-how? So these are the things we need to talk about a little bit more in terms of what's the know-how for getting through these assessment periods without any major difficulty or challenges.
Now, what kind of support should we be giving students and pupils during this time of year?
So the first thing I think I just want to say to people is that, learners or students at different levels, it's about keep it simple. All right, so already the assessment is already sort of the major sort of or most stressful thing at this time of year for people that are busy with sort of like a learning intervention of some sorts in their lives. So keep it simple. So one, start to plan. So start planning how you're going to get through this assessment. So get a sense of what the workload is that you need to get through, and then set up a schedule that includes everything you need to make it through. So people often think the schedule should just be around the studying. Yes, that's a part of the schedule, but you should also be putting in place time for things that are going to support you through the studying. So for example, good sleep. That's the first thing that we need. Good sleep before any sort of assessment that we conduct. We need to eat properly. So we need to make time. We need to schedule time to eat. So in other words, you need to put aside at least 45 minutes in a day for at least 3 meals. And that needs to be part of your schedule. You know yourself, so know sort of what your body does, know how your mind works, know when your concentration is at its best. Are you somebody that studies better during the day or at night or perhaps during the afternoon? So your schedule needs to then reflect you as a person. Make time for relaxation, make time for being able to chat to a friend on the phone, make time for to spend time with your pet. Make time for exercise, because exercise is also a great way for us to manage our stress levels, which in the end will make it easier for us to get through this assessment period. I think it's also important for people to know that sort of shorter study sessions are better because the human concentration span is actually really rather limited. And, so if you think about the modern sort of society that we live in, where people are used to, having quick sort of like Twitter feeds and those things, 150 characters, so our concentration levels are starting to decrease overall. So keep shorter study sessions, mix them up. So if you're doing various different subjects, try to do, like a math-like thing in one session and then skip to something lighter, maybe skip into a language or whatever your orientation is. So, mix up. What am I really good at? What's really easy for me? When do I do the more difficult subjects? Usually it's easier to get the more difficult ones out of the way because that's when your concentration needs to be at its peak, and it's best to do that sort of first thing when you get started. And then it's out of the way. Then other things will be easier. Or people can try the approach of starting with something lighter and manageable. That will build the confidence to be able to go on to bigger tasks. So you have to do what is best for you as an individual. So the bottom line is know yourself, know what works best for you, and work in accordance with that.
Just to pick up on that, how conducive are study groups, for example, having a number of students with you, to bounce ideas off of?
Sure. So study groups work differently for different people. So again, know yourself. So study groups can be a great source of support during this point in time. And, just to go back a step and say that sort of social support is also great. So social support comes in the form of family, friends. What we're doing now is offering social support for the nation in some sort of way. So it's about having the greater society supporting what it is that we are doing, right? So in the form of family, friends, teachers, those kinds of things, right? But then some people are more inclined to work better by themselves and others work better in a group. So it's about, are you that person that does better in a group, or are you the person that prefers to work by yourself? Because for some people it can be disruptive to be in a group. So in other words, they can't quite get into the group. So groups generally, I also find study groups are generally quite useful, especially a little bit further away from the time that the actual assessment is happening, and everyone's a bit more relaxed, a bit more free. But it can also be helpful to, I remember my own personal experience. It's really nice if you're all kind of thinking, oh, there's this great assessment we have to get through. It's quite difficult. So I know the section really well. I will teach people that section. You know that section really well. You'll teach people that section. But literally the day before an assessment, it is critical that people get into the habit of being relaxed the day before an assessment. I know that, we probably see lots of absurd cultures in through the media. We see that very often in forms of sitcoms or any other programs where people are cramming the day before and staying up all night. Now look, sometimes people end up in those kind of situations and they do the best that they can with what they have at that particular point in time. But as far as is possible, the encouragement is for people to kind of have a more relaxed time the day before an assessment, get a good night's sleep. And also, let's not forget the learning process. So if the learning process has been happening adequately throughout the year, so that means, was I paying attention in lectures or in classes? Did I sort of do something to revise the knowledge in my own head? So for example, just reading my notes after a class or before. So see what we're doing is we're changing learning culture as opposed to getting people to cram and get facts and things together just for the assessment, because then that also defeats the purpose. But if we start to change in the education system, we start changing the learning culture, that people are learning dynamically all the time, that by the time, so if you follow that model, the research says that people should be able to get a 60% just with that model without having done the sort of assessment prior to the process. So literally, the day before the assessment or a week before the assessment, you're really just refreshing. You're not learning things for the first time. You're kind of adding the other 40%, which is going to bring you closer to getting 100% on the assessment. So this is why the vantage point that I take is that we need to start much earlier with creating awareness around assessment, because usually this time of the year is where we start talking about it in the media and we start talking about it through the education system, but it needs to start right at the beginning of the year. It needs to be part of our sort of learning culture, or if we speak about an organization, to say a learning organization, which is learning in the moment and dynamically.
Lastly on my part, Bradley, looking towards after the exams, we're waiting for results. The results come, it's not what you expected, you failed. What then?
So the first thing is, once the assessment or the exam is done, it's done. So people must just let that go. It's done. There's nothing more that they can do with that. I mean, what are you going to do? Ask the examiner to give you a script back so you can... No, it's done. And we tend to have the reactive behavior of wanting to dissect after the exam. Oh, I didn't get that question. I saw that, that actually, look, the initial dissection amongst fellow students or it's just enough to... I think we're actually just debriefing from the session, but then it's done. There's nothing we can do. So then we look forward to the results. And the results is really a reflection on how you did in the assessment. So it's showing you what your competency is at that particular point in time going through that process. Now, it may have gone better than what you expected. It may have gone worse than what you expected. But the bottom line is, it is never the end of the world, if you didn't quite get the match or you got a little bit less than what you expected. So for those that maybe got way less than what is regarded as the pass or the requirement to move on to the next level, you can always start again. It's an opportunity for more learning. So in other words, why did I not manage in that particular task or assessment or exam? Is there something I can do differently? What were the shortfalls that I had? It really is not the end of the world. And I think particularly for the matriculants, where theirs often seems a little bit finite, it's like, wow, this is do or die. It's not, there's other ways of getting through the process. So I think the final word for the public out there is really that, we have to get into the mindset that we are doing the best that we can with what we have in this moment in time. And that's going to be good enough.
Thank you so much, Bradley.
Thank you for having me.
All right, as you've heard from clinical psychologist Bradley Daniels, if things don't go your way, it's not the end of the road. But throughout this period, it's important for family and friends to support matric pupils and other students that are writing. And it's important for these students and pupils to remember to make time to relax, as well as to make sure that they're really prepared ahead of time for their exams and that they're not really cramming right at the end.